I wanted to grab you today to talk about support for working parents. I wanted to ask you about flexible working because a lot of people use the term flexible working, but I think we're actually saying different things sometimes. For example, Elon's described flexible working as morally wrong and the laptop class is living in La La Land. What do we mean when we talk about flexible working?
A few things to unpack there, Phoebes. First of all, what is flexible working? I think that people have started to really think of flexible working as working from home, and that's one iteration of it, one version of it. There's part-time work, there are job shares, there's compressed hours, there's coming in early, leaving early, there's coming in late, leaving late. I mean, there are so many different variations. What I think flexible working actually means, what I think genuinely is behind the whole point of it, is more about trust and autonomy in getting the job done, regardless of where you're working or how you're working. It's much more about what are your outputs rather than having very stringent guardrails as to when you have to be in the office. And I find it really interesting that Elon Musk is saying this, because there's been quite a lot of discussion recently about this and about the return to office edict, which obviously is the polar opposite of flexibility. And there's a guy called Nick Shackleton-Jones who posts a lot of stuff on LinkedIn and on TikTok about this kind of stuff. And he said recently that he believes that this return to office mandate, this kind of anti-flexibility move, is more about typically middle-aged men who are at leadership level wanting to be back in the office because that's where they feel important. And, you know, the pandemic really shone a light on the fact that you're not feeling that important when your partner is badgering you about emptying the dishwasher. You're not really feeling the status there. Whereas that's a lot of what is kind of people were desperate to get back to the office. It's all said a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think there's a nugget of truth in that. So for me, flexibility is much more about that trust, that autonomy, output, and it's about really understanding what an impact that has on your employee and their engagement. Because for some, flexibility is a lifeline. I went to a conference for working parents, for working dads specifically, and for anyone with caring responsibilities or any big responsibility outside of work, flexibility is an absolute lifeline. Without that, you can't function. And then you're going to lose these talented people, all because you wanted a bit of status in the office.
So in the conversation about working parents, it's great to see that dads and men are getting more involved. How do you think that's helping the conversation?
So one of the things about this summit that was heartening was there were 50-50 gender split in the room. There were 50% dads, 50% mums. It was amazing because that's not normally the dynamic at these events. And yes, it was literally called Working Dad Summit. So you'd hope that there would be dads representation. But that was probably what struck me most, was that actually this was a conversation amongst all parents, and it wasn't just directed at mums, or it wasn't just mums that thought it was for them. I also thought it was great that they had lots and lots of co-chairs of parent and carer networks, and those co-chairs were men. And that, I think, is also an increasingly important part of it, because this is about making life better for all working parents. It's not about making it better just for the mums.
One of the biggest pieces of advice that we give to organisations about supporting working parents is that whole piece about role models. But what does role modelling actually look like in practice?
When we've done research, that's the number one thing that was shining through, that people were looking at not necessarily the senior leadership, but maybe individuals 1 or 2 levels above them, and thinking, does their life look aspirational to me? Do I want my life to look like theirs? And the answer to that was often not so much. But I think role models play a very important part in making, being able to highlight what someone's path in a company can look like. Where I think that the error can be made, or what is really challenging in these circumstances, is that when people are looking for a role model, it tends to be they're looking for one person to ideally represent everything that they find aspirational. That's a tough ask. That's a really tough ask, that any one person can fulfill all the things that you want to be. I think one of the things that shines through the coaching we do is that everybody is different. Everybody is an individual. So you can't really have one person represent that. And there aren't that many women still in more senior roles anyway, so you've got a smaller pot. So I think what I would say with the role models is maybe slightly challenging that assertion in terms of find different people, men and women, senior leaders or people 1 or 2 levels above, whatever they don't have to all fit the same criteria, and think, oh, they do something, I like the way that they do that, or I can see myself doing that, and almost build your own role model, almost like we have a board of advisors, or, you're looking at maybe have a role model version that is a little bit of lots of different people.
Off the back of the conversation about role models, obviously it's great to see more organisations extending parental leave to non-birth parents. Where does that piece fit in with the role models, do you think?
It has a huge influence. So, and yes, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I mean, there's a huge wave of companies. I think last count was about 165 organisations in the UK that are now offering equal parental leave. So that is great progress. And men or non-birth parents are taking it up. Where you're seeing the numbers of take up or the percentages higher is when you have senior leadership taking extended parental leave. So you can have all the best policies in the world, but if the culture isn't in place for somebody to feel like they can take it up without being penalised in some way, whether it's career progression or status, then it's not going to actually come to any use. So the fact that you see these senior individuals, and again, role models maybe 1 or 2 levels above them, taking parental leave, that is having a big impact, and you're seeing that already.
So for managers of working parents, what advice can you give them?
I think managers get a really rough deal in the respect that they are under fire from their leaders, and they get a whole load of hassle from the people that work for them. I think they do have a rough time. Having said that, it's always the managers that people point the finger at. In my experience of coaching a fair number of managers over the years, I don't think I've met any at all that don't want to do a good job, that don't want to support their person coming back from leave, which is typically when we speak to them. But I think the problem is that sometimes they have what we call benevolence bias. And that is where they're so keen to support that they don't necessarily give them enough challenge. And I mean that in that if there's too much support and not enough challenge, you kind of get into cozy club, and you can end up mummy tracking them. And it is typically mums that this happens to. So I think when I'm coaching managers, there are 3 things that I try and leave them with. The first one is really, really thinking about what assumptions you're making. Everybody talks their own book. Everybody. They think about how they did it, or how their family did it, or how other people that they know have done it. And I think really being self-aware enough to see what lens you're looking through. So check your assumptions. If somebody asks for flexibility, are you assuming that they are not as ambitious as they were? That's a very, very common assumption that's made, and often subconsciously. So check your assumptions. Ask. It sounds so simple. It is simple, but communication is often where things can go awry. And I'd really recommend that managers lean into coaching skills, ask open questions, and really listen, actively listen. And the third thing is that everyone's an individual. Everybody does it their own way. There is no right, there is no wrong when it comes to parenting. Well, maybe there are some things that are wrong when it comes to parenting, but mostly when it comes to finding the balance of work and home life, people find their own way. And remembering that everyone's an individual is also an important part of the puzzle. If you get those 3 things, don't assume, ask, everyone's an individual, you won't go far wrong.
When thinking about the dynamic between the manager and working parent, what have you seen in the coaching working on both sides? Can you give me an example of where it's worked really well?
As the person working with them, you also have a responsibility. It is a two-way dynamic. And I had somebody I was coaching recently who was incredibly ambitious and was really frustrated. She felt that her manager wasn't giving her his full support, that he was distracted by other things, that he was just so busy, or there was just other stuff that he was prioritizing. And we had a bit of a breakthrough when I asked her, like, if he's behaving in these ways, if this is what's going on, because she went into quite a lot of detail as to what was happening. And I was like, have you thought about what might be going on in his world for why he's behaving like that, or why he's doing what he's doing? And I just genuinely don't think it occurred to her that he was a human being. I think she was looking at him as a manager to facilitate her career, and that she hadn't really given it much thought as to what he was dealing with. And that conversation, when I saw her the next time, it had completely transformed the dynamic. She had gone into those conversations with much more curiosity and empathy as to what was going on for her manager. So it kind of flips it on its head a little bit. But I found that to be a very interesting conversation, and it really unlocked a whole different dynamic between the two of them.
So it sounds like the ideal scenario is that you build a progression plan together and then sit side by side and say, how are we going to make this work?
It's an ongoing conversation. I think that's the bit that's key as well. I've had some people come back from leave, and literally on day one, their managers said, so what do you want from your career? And they're like, oh, what the hell? What do I do with that conversation? I barely got dressed this morning. So I think there's a real, it's an ongoing conversation. But again, there's no prescription here. I think it's more about having those conversations at different points. And it might, and I think as the direct report, you also have to be honest about when you're open to that conversation. So it's a two-way thing.
Thinking more about the fact that it's a two-way dynamic from the working parent's perspective, how would you advise them going about conversations with their manager and asking for support? Because it's not an easy thing to do.
No, and I think also people would really love to be able to just look at you and you would know what they're thinking. In an ideal world, you wouldn't have to say anything, they just know. But I've already talked about making assumptions. I mean, mostly the assumptions are not correct, actually. So it's quite a dangerous game to play. I think this is what we would term, well, you kind of have to find a bit of bravery. You've got to find a bit of bravery to have these conversations, courageous conversations. And there's kind of a bit of a formula. It doesn't have to be you can really think about how to approach it in a way that takes a lot of the unknown about it. I find it really interesting when I talk with coachees and I say, but what is it that you want? Like, what is it that you want to say to your manager? And they try and say it and it's totally unclear. They haven't necessarily got the clarity of the demand or of the ask. So I think there's a bit of work up front is like, how clear are you about what it is that you want? You can also prepare the manager for that conversation. Say, by the way, I wouldn't mind having half an hour of your time so we can discuss X. I think also empathizing with their reaction is really helpful as well. Like, how is this going to land with them and what might their responses be? And then if you can also answer that with thinking about how you can outline how it might be beneficial to both you and them, then that can be a really helpful way of taking a conversation forward. But first of all, you've got to find that bit of bravery.
So you spoke about was it 165 companies now have equalised parental leave, which
At
is
this moment in time, that's it.
Which is great. And we know who they are.
Yeah.
But not everybody knows what offerings they have as a working or expectant parent, do they?
No, absolutely not. And that's absolutely right. Those companies that have equalised parental leave, they're shouting about it. They're seeing it as a competitive advantage, which I hope will mean that more will follow suit. But yes, a lot of people don't publish publicly what their parental offering is. And that really does the people a disservice that might want to go and work for them, because this is important. Flexibility and parental leave is definitely a huge influence on someone's experience of their job and their company. So yeah, we've been publishing a paper called the Parental Fog Index since 2019. When we started, and it's a call for transparency. It's literally saying a criteria of invisible through to Beacon. And those Beacon employers often are the ones that are offering equalised parental leave, funnily enough. Can't believe there's a connection there. And so there's still a lot of work to be done, that's for sure. But there has been real progress. So in the 6 years that we've been publishing this, when we started, I think 33 companies were invisible. That meant there was not a single reference to being a parent on their entire website.
That's 33 of the 100.
33 of the 100. So we used the Times top 100 graduate employers as our sample size, and a third of them did not publish a single reference. Fast forward 6 years, there's one company that doesn't publish anything. So there's been real progress, for sure. The number of Beacon companies has also increased, but there's always work to do.